Norfolk Business Show with Danny Snelling. Sponsored by MT Comms.
Okay, Richard, all set?
All set.
Richard Porritt, everybody. Editor. Well, you tell our listeners what you do and what you get up to, and then we'll perhaps delve a little deeper into Richard.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Danny.
No
really,
problem.
really nice to be here. So I am currently the regional editor of the East of England for NewsQuest, which is the company that owns the Eastern Daily Press, Norwich Evening News, whole swathe of weekly papers here in the East, in Norfolk Evening and Cams as well. So my day-to-day is very much around those two big dailies, and the Eastern Daily Press is the biggest selling regional print newspaper in England now, bigger than the Yorkshire Post, bigger than the Manchester Evening News.
Oh.
And also, I'm sure we'll get onto this, we have a huge digital audience as well. Previously, I started in the north of England. I'm not a Norfolk native, although I do love it and I'm never leaving, unless you all try and kick me out, which is reasonably possible. On a weekly in a town called Dewsbury, or Newsbury as we used to call it. It's very, very newsy patch on a free weekly paper, but the joy of that was that it was owned by the editor. It was an independent. It was very much, in those days, I think I was the first reporter that they hired. So there was an editor, news editor, myself. We didn't have any photographers to speak of, a designer and a sub-editor. That was pretty much it. We had a small sales team as well. But prior to that, I actually had I'll say failed career, but after my A-levels, it was suggested perhaps that I was being over-ambitious at wanting to be a journalist.
Okay. At what point did the want to be a journalist come in?
Oh, well, we'll go back a bit further then.
Yeah,
in that case.
do.
So I was an odd child, quite an odd adult to be honest, but I was a particularly odd child. And my grandma, God rest her soul, an absolutely lovely woman, used to babysit, and I would stay at her house on a Friday. And on a Saturday morning, she would give me £1 coin. That was my pocket money. And we didn't have much money at all, and Mum would take me mainly window shopping, to be fair to her, but it was something to do on a Saturday afternoon. And I would, instead of buying sweets or chocolates, I would buy a newspaper. I think to begin with, that was mainly to do with the sports coverage. I was a big football fan, big sports fan. So that's kind of how I got in. But after spending probably, I don't know how much the Saturday newspapers were in those days, maybe 50p on, what, and I swapped. So I would get the Telegraph or the Times or the Mail or the Sun. I would swap them round. I didn't have an allegiance necessarily. I started turning to the news pages and reading the whole thing. And it sort of built from there. And I've always was always really interested in current affairs. I remember being terribly excited when there was some big political story when the day Thatcher left. I remember watching it glued to the TV. I was 9. I remember the challenges to John Major and the rise of Tony Blair. I really was interested in what was going on in the wider world. But when I got to considering what I would do after my GCSEs, I did very much wanted to do A-levels, but there wasn't an A-level. There was no sixth form at my school, so I had to go to college. The careers advisor, not the college, at school, sort of smiled and said, maybe lower your expectations a little bit, Richard. I'm not sure that journalism, you really.
Yeah.
And there was someone else, a sort of close family member, who said, Richard, don't be silly. Don't be silly, you're never going to be a journalist. So I think because there wasn't a great deal of money, I couldn't quite square how I was going to go to, you don't have to go to university to be a journalist, but it certainly makes life a bit easier. Couldn't quite figure it out. So went to my A-levels, loved that, and did some small bit of student journalism there as well, and learned a bit more about journalism. But at the end of that, it was still in the back of my head that I needed to earn some cash, So I became a trainee manager at Sainsbury's which is a 2-year course and really good actually. And I didn't take a lot from A-level. It was normally you'd done a degree. So I went on every course and learned everything you could about supermarkets. And lots of people really helped me out. And I learned what a proper working shift was, because it's hard work. It really is hard work. 60, 70-hour weeks. And of course, the trainee manager gets lumbered with all the heavy lifting and things like that. But the only problem was I was absolutely dreadful at it. I just wasn't a good trainee manager. Retail just wasn't for me. I was very good with the customers and liked the people. But when it came to the more technical aspect, like ordering and returns and the boring stuff, basically, I just couldn't get my head around it. I think they're still drinking Dutch Advocaat in Dewsbury in West Yorkshire because I once, one Christmas, over-ordered by, I think it was something like 50%. And the store manager just was, and at that moment I kind of thought, I'm not sure. Can I really do this?
I suppose it'll be computerised now anyway.
Much different now, much different now. We were just at the cusp of that. So I decided, I've got nothing to lose at this point. I was still living at home, so I went to the local university, to Huddersfield University, and studied English with the view of going into journalism, and then worked really hard for free. The paper that gave me my first chance, I worked there for a summer as a on work experience as a young reporter, and then it was my last exam. It was a Thursday, and my phone was buzzing in my pocket, which obviously was making me quite nervous because I certainly shouldn't have a phone going off in an exam. And afterwards, when I got out, I looked at it thinking, I thought it'd been my mother who got the time wrong, going, how did it go, love? But actually, it was a number I didn't recognise. So I rang it back, and it was Martin Shaw, who was my first news editor, who offered me a job. And I started the next week, literally started the next week. I had some holiday to take from...
And where was that?
That was the Dewsbury District Press.
Yeah.
It's no longer going, but it was a real fascinating creature. It was a proper tabloid, screaming, shouting newspaper in a town that had its problems and still does have its problems. A great town, salt of the earth, but has its issues. And this was a newspaper that wasn't afraid and perhaps didn't have the restraints of the other paper in the town, which was owned by Johnson Press, big corporate. And we just had a whale of a time, but it was hard work. It was really hard work.
Was it actually reporting, going out, getting the news?
Yeah, I was just a straight general news reporter. We broke some really good, important stories for the town. And after about 9 months, the Daily, the bigger Daily next door, the Huddersfield Daily Examiner, where I'd also done quite a lot of work experience when I was a student, came knocking, and I was very, very lucky. In those days, it was actually quite hard, much harder than it is now to get into the industry, actually. They weren't offering traineeships as much. It was the first sort of real time that the regionals felt the pinch, I think. And the internet was still in its infancy, but they were starting to see there were problems. So there wasn't perhaps as much money sloshing around as there had been. But there was still enough to send me on a 16-week course to Newcastle, and they'd put me up in a flat in the city centre. I had a whale of a time, can you imagine? Learnt shorthand, learnt law, which is still very important. We still, if your listeners don't know what shorthand is, it's a different alphabet, but it's like learning a whole new language in written form. But it means that you can transcribe things very, very accurately and at speed, because we talk much quicker than we can write. Yeah. So you are obliged to get 100 words a minute still to be able to go to court. You still are not allowed to record in court, although I think that the winds of change are coming for that one. But it also shows me that the journalists really want it, because it is the toughest exam I've ever passed.
I can imagine, it is. Like say, learning another language, and that takes years.
And so, managed to get it out of the way in 16 weeks. And then you're a trainee for 18 months, 2 years. I begged and begged the editor to let me do it quicker. So I took my seniors after a year. I was real saddo. And I just learned everything I could about the industry. Passed and was very quickly made the investigations correspondent at the Huddersfield Examiner. So was just taken off the leash then and allowed to do my own ideas, anything I want. And sometimes they took days and days. I really was given the space, chasing around cowboy builders and gangsters and drug dealers and all kinds of really, really fun stuff. And then the bombs went off on the tube. We've just had the anniversary, 7/7, just over 20 years ago now, unbelievably. And the ringleader was from our patch, and the other 3 were from the edge of our patch. It's a massive news story when it came out that they were nearby, and we managed to get one of the only pictures actually of Jermaine Lindsay. Got lots of really good detail about background detail about them. And it was at about this time that the national newspapers started getting interested and started offering me what we call shifts. So it's basically freelancing. You go and work a day shift for them, or maybe a night shift, and they keep trying you out. Obviously, get paid.
This was for like a specific task, or
So shifters would just turn up and sit down, and if something happened, they would do it. There are freelancers that will do a story right to the end and then pitch it. Of course, I did do that for a little bit, but the danger in that is that no one wants it, and you've spent all this time
That's
working.
kind of what you see in the movies, isn't it? And other things, they write this story and they're trying to get it published.
Yeah, it's a tough gig. That I did do it for a little while, but that was after I was already established. So when you're first there and you're a kid, you just need to get in the door and try and get lucky. So I worked a lot for the News of the World, another paper that's sadly not with us. The opposite to a Midas Touch here. And that was right in the middle of that newsroom being, I'm not going to describe it like this, but some people have out of control, right in the midst of phone hacking. I didn't ever hack a phone. In fact, I didn't do anything particularly dubious at the News of the World because I was so junior.
Did you notice it going on though?
No.
Did it know?
It really wasn't open and talked about. And I think, looking back, that there was perhaps... There will have been some senior people who didn't ask enough questions, probably. I think me with a sort of technical mind on it, it's like, well, it wasn't really hacking. It's not hacking. If they don't change the password and everybody knows how to use a voicemail, it's just their own idiocracy for not... Yeah, I mean, the public didn't have that level of sympathy.
I know they didn't, but I was just like, what a fool. If you're in the public eye, why would you not protect your voicemail?
I think we got up to all kinds of things that were questionable.
I'm sure, yeah.
But I never hacked phone. I don't know anyone who hacked phone. I know people who were arrested as part of that investigation. Don't know anyone who actually went. I do actually, a couple of people who went to prison. But I don't. It wasn't like just hack the phone. It wasn't that level of open. I think there were some journalists who were doing it on the quiet, and perhaps then pitching the stories, and the news desk just go, "This is a great story."
Yeah,
and of course there is a relationship between editor and reporter whereby you're not really supposed to say who's your source because then you're questioning their professional standards. So I think that there was a perfect storm there, and of course the story that a lot of people think that the story that brought the whole thing crashing down was Millie Dowler. I'm not going to go into that massively now because it's controversial and what he's put out there, and I think there's a drama coming in with David Tennant in my daughter's telling me about it. It's perhaps not quite what happened, but nonetheless, bad things did happen, and people did deserve to be punished. So I'm not here as an apologist for the News of the World. All the industry likes it. It wasn't just the News of the World, by the way. There were other papers doing it as well. Yeah. But like I said, and just to underline, I didn't. If my boss is watching, I can assure you I'm absolutely clean. Anyway, I did that, and a lot of shifts for the London Evening Standard, which is kind of still with us, but not in the same way it was. When I was doing reporting shifts there, we were putting out 6, 7, 8 editions a day.
Wow.
So you'd pick up the 8 a.m. edition of the Evening Standard, and you'd have a story on page 5 or 7 or 9, one of these main news pages. And by the time you bought the West End final, which printed at 4 p.m., that story would be a tiny little news in brief.
I've always wondered how they time it and how they do that, because it's amazing sometimes. Something happens when you're going to sleep and then you wake up and it's there in print. You just think, how have they done that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a massive operation in those days. We were selling 250,000 copies. Like I said, I was very junior there as well, but was lucky to get a lot of shifts and meet a lot of good friends there. But I did that for about a year. At the same time, I was also working for a regional called South London Press. So I was often doing a day shift and then a night shift. I would certainly do that every Friday and Monday. I did 3 months without a day off because I was desperate to get a staff job at the News of the World or the Standard. But it just didn't happen for me at the time. I think there was an element of I was new in the city. Believe it or not, especially on the Evening Standard, we were doing a lot of door knocking. So a lot of still young reporters' time is knocking on people's doors, especially if their kids have died or something terrible's happened. So it can be quite daunting. And when I knock on a door in Chelsea, my accent was thicker then. They thought I was there to rob them. So it was a difficult gig. Then there was a job advertised at the Press Association. So I'll just briefly explain what the Press Association is, because it's kind of a bit of a secret in the industry. But if any of you have read the news today or listened to a radio show or watched the TV news, some of that information will have come from the UK Newswire, the Press Association. Probably the world's most famous newswire is Reuters. So the PA is the UK version of that. So instead of every single newspaper sending a reporter to every single political press conference, royal job, court case, one Press Association, one goes, and then they file it. It's sent out electronically these days, but it used to be printed out and run up and down Fleet Street. And it's famed for its accuracy and for its independence. There's no political bias. And obviously there's no advertising. We pay a subscription to that. I think it's getting towards 200 years old. I mean, it's been around forever. And it was brilliant.
So how does the finances work about that? Obviously a reporter gives it to the Press Association?
No, they have their own staff. They've got hundreds of journalists.
Yes, okay.
So they were based on Vauxhall Bridge Road when I was there. They'd moved a few years earlier from Fleet Street. And they're now based, and I really must go and visit them in the new office. I think it's over Paddington Way. So they've got a full staff. They're staffed like it's
like a newspaper.
It's like a national newspaper.
Yeah.
And they've got a huge staff in Scotland. They've got, or they certainly did have when I was there, people in LA and New York. They had people in the European Parliament in those days, probably less so now. And they've got people in every region, as well as a big staff in London. So in tomorrow's Eastern Daily Press, I can assure you there will be words and pictures from the Press Association. Now, you might want to take a little bit and add it to your story. Or sometimes you might just want to print it in full if you've got a national news page or whatever. A lot of our sports pictures, even royal pictures, come from there.
And then you pay a subscription. You
Correct.
don't pay anything separately.
That's it. You can pay for if you want video, you pay a bit more. If so it's tailored. It's a little bit like if you've got Sky and then you want sport and then you want cinema and then you. So I was the.
Well, presumably it's like interrupt, but it must be a bit of a law unto itself. If there's no competition, surely they can charge what they like.
Well, the competition is. That's an interesting question. Maybe off air, I'll talk to you a bit more.
Yeah, but I'm doing it. It's very much like the property industry. All estate agents hate Rightmove because they are. You've got to be on Rightmove, and they charge. Yeah. They know it, so they just put the price up every year, regardless.
Yeah, It's had. There have been other newswires that have launched or tried to launch in the past. Obviously, there are some competition. Reuters do a lot of UK news.
And of course your own stuff, I guess.
Yeah. And the problem for the PA right now is that in the old days, we were always told that your biggest customers are the regionals because you've got the morning regionals, so the night shift overnight at PA would be servicing them, and then you've got the evening papers as well. Now, I don't think there's any actual true evening newspapers that print during the day and are distributed in cities. Obviously, here in Norwich, it used to be the Norwich Evening News, still called that, but that prints overnight. Yeah. The economy's just stopped working in newspapers. Yeah. So the PA is, it's become harder and harder for them. But who we saw as our competition as journalists, and journalists do like to have a bit of competition, was BBC News 24. Sky News.
Yeah,
We wanted to be first,
Yeah.
so that then the newspaper websites could get it up before the TV.
Got it.
So that people were turning off their TV and going onto the website, or at least doing both at the same time. So first and right were the two things that we used to talk about at the Press Association. I was there briefly as a reporter, and then I was moved on to the news desk. I did that very briefly as one of numerous news editors, and then I became the night editor, which is a massive gig. It's a massive gig for me. I never thought that why on earth they gave a daft 27-year-old northern lad the night editorship of the National Press Association. I've no idea, but they did. They took a punt, and it was one of my favourite jobs ever. I absolutely loved it. Start work at 2, usually finish off via a late bar at about 3 in the morning. And we had, anything that broke in the evening or at night was completely mine. So we had I had some massive stories and some great exposure, and I think we did a really good job. I think we had a really good team, and I absolutely loved it. But again, then because the PA is often seen as a gateway onto the national newspapers. If you've done it there, you've sort of proved yourself. Well, lots of big names have come through the Press Association. So I then had a stint on the news desk at the Daily Mail, which was really tough, actually. I learnt a lot, but it was really tough. And then I went back to the Evening Standard as executive news editor there. Spent, maybe 2.5 years there. And I really liked that paper. The masthead is still, I have some really, really nice memories. But in the end, and I don't mind admitting this now, I wouldn't have at the time, the early mornings just completely sent me mad. I just couldn't. I had 2 small children at the time. So a car used to pick me up at, I think it was 4:30, but it might have been 5. But anyway, if it was before 9 o'clock, it was too early as far as I was concerned. And then you had to be absolutely on it first thing in the morning. And I just really struggle with that. I still do now. I get up now at 7:30 just to make sure that I'm ready for 9:30 when it's news conference. So to be on it first thing in the morning, I found really tough. And I wasn't staying up until 2 in the morning. I wasn't going out partying.
I think people are wired certain ways, aren't they?
Yeah,
They can only cope with what they can't.
So I tried and tried. And once they talked to me, they said, would you... I didn't make them aware that I was struggling with the early mornings because it seemed like it's quite a macho environment in newsroom, and I don't think it would have gone down too well. But they did talk to me. My boss did talk to me about whether I wanted to be the night editor of the Evening Standard. And I was like, this is brilliant. I could say, I'll come in the afternoon. I'll stay till midnight. That'll work because it worked before. It's just the other way around that I can't make work. But in the end, they decided that was I should stay on days. So I came. We moved as well. Very expensive, as everyone was, of course, to live in central London, especially with 2 small kids. So we moved out east. I briefly worked then for a law firm as a parliamentary lobbyist, but realised that I couldn't not be in newsrooms, or at least working in news. Freelanced for a little bit, and then what was Archant, the Archant or Eastern Counties newspapers before it was Archant, who owned all the papers out here in the east. They launched after Brexit a national broadsheet title called The New European, and they needed some people with with national experience to freelance, and it was me. So I was back in the newsroom. It was, again, a very small staff. It reminded me of being back on that weekly in Dewsbury, actually. We were putting out 48 pages broadsheet every week, pretty much from scratch. A lot of it was commissioned, but it was a very political newspaper, so they wanted this to remain support. It's still going. It's called The New World now. They've relaunched it recently, but it's still going really well. The chief content officer at the time at Archant was a chap called Matt Kelly, who launched it and edited it, and still does. And great idea, really great idea. And we worked so hard. We worked really long hours, and then won every award going. And it was a real them and us. Everyone thought it wouldn't last, and it's still going. All these years later, getting close. Well, next year it'll be 10 years old. I mean, it's extraordinary. And after a while, they took me on staff as a political editor. So I had an office in Westminster, I had a lobby card, Still do, actually, I think. And was working at the Ipswich office. So I was living in Woodbridge at the time, so that was quite handy. And then would come up to Norwich as well. So I always seemed to be on a train. I was often in Westminster, taking advantage of the tax-free alcohol, which is great in the palace, and just having a really fun time. I thought, I'm back. This is great. And then I was walking past the boss's office, and he this is how I remember it at least, he kind of reached out from behind his desk and sort of pulled me in by my collar. I thought I'd done something wrong. I probably had. I just thought I'd been found out. And he said, we're having trouble with the business coverage. It's not getting much of an audience online, and we've got a very big team, and the editor has decided to leave to go to another job, the business editor. We want you to apply. And I was like, I don't know much about business. I'm a reporter, and I've done some political stuff previously, so I know a bit about that. I'm not sure I'm the right man for the job. And he said, we'd really like you to apply. So I thought, okay, fine. This seems to be like you must apply. So I did, and I got it. And I accepted it, not reluctantly, because I sort of got my head around it then. And we completely transformed the way we did our business coverage. Before, it had been quite traditional, new appointments, acquisitions, all that kind of stuff, which we still do. But I wanted it to be more issue-led. So myself and a really talented and very dear friend, Eleanor Pringle, sort of set about changing how we did it. So we tend to brainstorm on a Sunday afternoon ahead of the Wednesday business supplement, which was, I think, 12 pages when we took it over. And we would pick something that would rile the business community a bit, just get a conversation going with them, something that was a bit chewy or needed some explanation. And then we decided that we would take the front out and try and make it, and you might laugh, but like a piece of art. So we had these wonderful designers at the time, and myself and Ellie would come up with all these crackpot ideas for what we call in the industry a concept front. So, for example, probably my favourite one was the choose furlough front, which was when people were weighing up whether they should do furlough or not. Yeah. And for those of a certain age, although it still resonates culturally, we did the monologue from the beginning of Train Spotting, but did it different. And it was in the orange and white of the Train Spotting, and we had business people looking like, if you remember the 1, 2, 3, 5 Train Spotting, on the inside as well. We did another brilliant one where Ellie wrote a really, really clever piece about office romances and whether they're now frowned upon, and what the law is around it, and all this kind of thing. Sort of grey area that people don't tend to talk about. And we made the front of the business supplement look like a Mills and Boon cover, and won awards. It really took off, and we got it up to about 24 pages, which is big for a regional business supplement. And it suddenly had a bit of attitude and a bit of fun about it as well. It wasn't just boring business press releases. And then, as COVID sort of went past the year mark and the 18-month mark, I was made, obviously everyone was struggling, including Archant. Archant was bought by a private equity firm, and subsequently basically went bust. Archant basically went bust and had to be bought. And the business team got smaller and smaller, whereas it was 8 when I started, it got smaller and smaller and smaller. I was offered my first full editorship of the Norwich Evening News, and the business team was sort of merged into the rest of the EDP team. I didn't look after the EDP at the time. And the advertising fell out a lot during COVID and didn't come back. And it was only January this year when we decided to relaunch. So I always wanted to turn the pages pink, and I was told I wasn't allowed, because in a little knowing nod to the FT, of course. Now, it's very expensive to print on print paper, actually. not because the paper's expensive, but we wouldn't want the rest of the book to be pink,
Yeah,
so we would have to stop it, and it'd have to be an insert, basically.
Yeah.
But now that I'm, a bit more in charge, so we say, I revisited it, and in January this year, just kept saying, "No, I want it pink. I want it pink. It's got to be. We can do it. I know we can." So now we wash them pink, so it's a design thing rather than they don't have to stop. It's not actual pink paper; it's normal paper, but washed pink. Yeah. We decided to rename it the Business Pink. It has a nice little tie into the Pinken. There's also some plans for the Pinken, so keep your eyes open on that one. And we've redoubled our efforts to get back to that really high quality, really sort of meaty content. So I'm sure there's lots of the business community listening and watching this. And what I'd say is, get in touch and tell us your story. Adam Barker is the very talented business correspondent, and he's doing some really, really good work. And the support from the business community started to come back. It had started to come back before we turned it pink and relaunched, but it's really started to come back now, and so we're really proud of that this year. After I'd been the editor of the Evening News for, goodness, it wasn't long, 18 months, and really drove it tabloid, really wanted it to scream and be like a little regional version of the news of the world without the scandal, hopefully. Maybe with a bit of scandal, but not too much. Or at least other people's scandal rather than ours. We were bought, Archant was bought by NewsQuest, and thank goodness, because that PE arrangement wasn't going to last forever, because that's the nature of their business. NewsQuest own more than 200 news titles in the UK, from tiny little weeklies who do a great job at serving really small community news, to the Eastern Daily Press, which is still a huge big deal, and certainly a big voice in regional media and in Westminster as well. And amid that shake-up, I was offered the regional editorship. So it is 3 years next year. I absolutely love it. It is an absolutely fantastic job. It is a joy to be the editor of the Eastern Daily Press, such a storied title with such, I've got so many wonderful journalists and editors that have gone before, and a wonderful team right now. They're absolutely fantastic, and they work incredibly hard to make sure that the EDP is, and I know it is, so I'm not trying to convince you.
Yeah.
People will, and you're going to quiz me
from Norfolk.
You might perhaps quiz me on this next, but I read all the other regional papers, and I can assure you that the quality of the journalism on the EDP far outshines a lot of them. I have been accused of perhaps getting closer to the line than some previous EDP editors have done. That is absolutely on purpose.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I want the EDP just to shout a bit louder. It's still a paper of record. It's still a serious newspaper. It's still, and never will, have any political allegiances. But I do think it was important that if feathers needed ruffling, we were willing to do it. So we have done that. We have upset people. I personally, through my editorship, have upset lots of people. We don't set out to upset people, but it does come with the territory sometimes.
I think before we go too much into the current guys, just looking back on the history of all those firms and all those papers you worked on, is there any sort of real standout-ish moments that either just an incredible story or a high point, low point, big news article?
Anyone who's watching this and has been for a drink with me that's gone to maybe more than 2 drinks will have probably heard this one before. You were out of earshot when I told it when we went for a drink. But the moment that I'll always remember, and there have been plenty. Most recently, when the Queen sadly died, massive story for us here in Norfolk because of the royal connections. Big regional stories when there's murders or there's big court cases. Those it's so vital that we get those right, and we don't always. I'm not for a minute suggesting we're perfect, because we're humans working at speed. We do get things wrong. We will always correct them if it is a genuine mistake, of course. I'm going to mention two that I think changed my career, and the first one was actually I'm going to mention three. The first one was the bombing, which I've spoken about before, because it meant that my name was getting in front of national news desks. So I made a little bit of a name for myself then, outside of the region I was in. The second one, which was the biggie, was when I was at the Press Association. And in fact, full disclosure, and a lot of my stories start like this as well, I was in the pub across the road from the office, having a beer with a great journalist called Wesley Johnson, who up until recently was still at the Press Association. And the news editor, the wonderful Nick Hodgson, rang me and said, some little website in the States is reporting that Michael Jackson's had a heart attack. And I said, it'll be fine. 20 minutes later, he said, they're still reporting it, and now some of the TV is starting to say. So I said, all right, get a story running saying that there's reports. But of course, at the Press Association, you need two sources for every story, right, and they need to be solid, because you cannot, if you're potentially giving
you can just put, a little website is reporting. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So our guys in the States were struggling to get a source. The AP had picked up on it and were half reporting it. That's the American Press Association, the Associated Press. And we were starting to get frustrated because we wanted to be first. We wanted to be first. It was exciting. And the European guys weren't reporting it because they just couldn't. Sky were reporting that it might have happened. And so were the Beeb. And they were ringing us going, how close are you to getting confirmation? The pressure was really on. So we rang the morgue at the hospital. And although they didn't go, yeah, he's here, they did say, we've been told not to say anything, and that the family are going to speak. So we took a risk, and it was a big risk. I didn't tell my editor until my leaving due, actually. I didn't tell John Finger until my leaving due. And
so technically that wouldn't have been enough
wouldn't
to go
quite
on,
have been a source, but, risk-reward. So with that and the AP's coverage, we thought that was enough. So we announced it. I still remember, so there's a PA do snaps that are like just one line, so that everyone's like, right, get it, start reporting it, and we'll wait for what we used to call snap full, and then a full story. So everyone's ready then, they're pulling out the Michael Jackson obituary that was only half written. We weren't expecting him to die. It's the greatest moments, the most controversial moments, all the stuff that goes around.
This is something I do remember from something you told me in the past. You do have pre-prepared stories for lots of eventualities.
Yeah, we do. And the Press Association are brilliant at that, and that's why they're so quick.
Yeah.
So I think Michael Jackson's was sort of half pre-written, because you'll go back to it. The obit writers will go back to it every now and then, add bits, and so it needed tidying up. But we had to send the snap first, which I'm pretty sure was, and it's not a very good snap. I'm not proud of it. King of Pop Michael Jackson is dead. The Press Association can confirm. So the first people in Europe, we think, the first journalists in Europe to confirm it, and then to make sure that you didn't accidentally publish something, you had to press Control. I can't remember exactly. I think it's Control-Alt-T to actually get it on the wire. So you couldn't just lean on your keyboard. And when you did a snap, you had to have someone else watching over your shoulder. So it had to be someone senior that would do it, and someone generally sort of next in line would watch over your shoulder to make sure there was no errors, but also to make sure that no one was having a laugh and a joke and putting up something that wasn't true. And I turned to Nick and I said, you do realise if this is not true, we will never work in journalism again, because it's a huge libel to say someone's dead. And he nodded.
Can I have that verbally?
And I said, okay. So I hit the button, and went outside for a cigarette, and I was shaking, thinking, "Oh my God!" I knew he was dead, but I was very, very nervous.
Yeah.
So I came back up into the office and I rang the editor, whose son answered. It was quite late at night. The editor, Jonathan Grunt, brilliant editor, was in bed, and his son took the phone. It must have been a cordless phone. Took it upstairs and said, "Dad, it's the office on the phone." And he said, "Oh, okay." It was a lovely chat. He said, "Hi, Jonathan here." And I said, "Oh, hi, it's Richard at the office." He said, "Hi, Richard." I said, "I've just snapped that Michael Jackson's dead." And he said, "And is he?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'll be right there." So in he came, and we were there for about 20 hours, I think, from the start of the shift to the end. And that was it was a wild night, a wild day. And it seemed like to have such a big breaking news story when all the other senior editors were fast asleep in bed.
Yeah.
And I think we did a pretty good job, to be honest. I think we were pretty good. And we got on, myself and Nick, the news editor that night, we got on the night news editor, we got on the tube. We both lived in North London. And there were people reading the stuff that we'd done in the papers,
Because it's all very well doing it for your paper, but if you're doing it for the Press Association, of course, you've got all those other sources taking from
Absolutely,
you.
Yeah. No, so that was an incredible night. And then the one that I did a lot of work on, but really did change the most recent part of my career was Brexit. If it hadn't have been for Brexit, the Archon wouldn't have launched a European. And I think it's unlikely that I would be the editor of the EDP now. So, and it was such a tumultuous time, and there was so much going on, and trying to explain to a general reader the intricacies of Brexit was a real skill, and I hope we did a good job. I think, the fallout continues, but all those prime ministers, all that chaos, and similarly with COVID, a massive story, and the regional press was so important during that period. We worked tirelessly to get the facts out. And I remember I was the only person in the office, pretty much. I did about a week, 10 days at home, and I said to HR, I can't do this. And they said, "It's okay, you can go to the office." And we had key worker status as journalists, so we could. So I was the last man out and the first person back in. And I remember the office phone ringing one day, and it was an old boy somewhere out in the sticks. And he was really worried. He lived on his own, he was really worried. And he was trying to figure out if the stuff he was being told on the TV was true. And we chatted for about 45 minutes, and I reassured him that it's all true, and he does need to be careful, but, he might see some stuff that, and I hope that it reassured him. And he said, I'm getting the EDP delivered every morning, I'll carry on reading it. And, and that connection between the mastheads and the reader is vital. Yes, we're a business. Yes, we need to sell advertising, and I know you're dying to ask me about that. But we also do a good job. We cover crime, we cover court. I've got 4 people covering court. I've got 3 people covering politics. Whereas there are so many regional papers out there that simply don't have that coverage anymore. We still have a team doing community news, fetes and galas, and we still have people doing education, doing health. Obviously, we still have brilliant football coverage. The Pinkin goes from strength to strength. It's vital. But what I will say, and this is the good news, I think, both, especially for me, but for the not just the whole region, but the whole country, is that we're starting to turn a corner. Print sales have been in decline for 35 years. It was quickened by the internet, but it was already happening. I've never worked for a newspaper, barring that first one at Dewsbury and the New European, that has put on growth week after week or year after year. And that was because there were new products. It's different. And the EDP is no different. It sells vast quantities fewer than it used to. But it has the biggest audience it's ever had. That's, if you add print together, the free audience, which is a controversial one that we'll perhaps get to, and now, and this is a massive growth area for us and really pleasing, what we call reader revenue, paid digital subscriptions. In Norfolk now, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of subscribers to our titles, whether it be the Pink and whether it be the EDP, or whether it be the Beccles and Bungay Journal, who still want that journalism, but are happy to take it on their phone now. And of course, if you do, and you still, like I do, love to flick through a newspaper, you can do that digitally as well on there. And if you pay for the full subscription, there are no adverts. Now, I don't know if that will be the case forever, but even if you pay for the lighter subscription, so that doesn't include the app, or the adverts are fixed position adverts, so much more like the reading experience of a newspaper. Whereas, and I know that this annoys you, and frankly, as a reader, I don't just read DDP, I read other things. Frankly, as a reader for other things, it annoys me as well. But it's the pop-up ads and the ads that follow.
Well, I think it's important, because one thing you educated me on was, the fact that the mistake has been made in the past by other tabloids giving it away, and that
we never ever should have given it away. And I remember saying to a news editor when I was in Huddersfield, because we had a website, how does it get there? What are we doing with this? What are we? And he said, don't worry. No one's ever going to take their computer, because of course this is before smartphones, on a bus. And of course he was right at the time. A huge tower, a massive monitor, a keyboard, and no power source. So no. But it was literally a few years after that we could read it on our phones. And we carried on giving it away for free. The belief was that the audience would be big enough, because for every click, we get 0.0001 of a pence. The belief was that the audience would be big enough and that it would just pay for itself, no problem. And we'll, of course, monetize it through selling some ads around it as well. For regional newspapers, that audience was never going to be big enough just from those clicks. And even nationals are now realizing, the biggest commercial news website, certainly in England, but in the world for a time, was the Daily Mail. They're now more and more of their stuff is going behind a paywall. When I was there, it was the belief we'll get the audience as big as we can, and it'll be fine. And it was to a point, but it has reached saturation. Similarly, at the Sun, the guys who did it right from the beginning are really reaping the rewards now, and that's the Financial Times. I know it's a little bit different, but the Times and Sunday Times as well. Their reader is now comfortable, and they've got lots and lots of digital subscriptions. In the region, we didn't have as much cash to develop things like that in the regionals. It's very much more hand to mouth, and has been forever. And so it's taken a bit of catching up. But I've been very keen in the last 4 or 5 or 6 years in that reader revenue platform, and our whole editorial strategy, which I could talk about forever, but will bore the listeners, so I'm not going to lose your listeners. But our whole editorial strategy is based around getting people to subscribe digitally. That's the future. And we've really turned a corner. We only launched 3 years ago. We're really turning the dial on this. And at some point, not too far away, and I hope in my tenure, there's going to be more digital paid for paying readers than there is print paying readers. That's not to say that we're turning our back on print. The EDP has still got a lot of time left in print because people still really love it. And its audience is big enough that it will carry on for many, many years to come in print too. And to be honest, putting the print newspaper together is a lot more fun than just uploading it digitally. And it's still the one job that I do every day is the front. I don't do the EDP front, although I sign it off and everything else. But I like to go in and do the Norwich Evening News, the tabloid screamy one. That's my most fun part of the day. I always thought, and everyone always told me, enjoy your time in journalism, Richard, because you're too young to be able to retire as a journalist. And because it'll be gone by then, unless you're working for Sky News or BBC or whatever. And I think for a long time that was the case. But in the last 3 years, I think the regional newspaper industry has turned a corner. And I think, and I've got my fingers firmly crossed, if I so desire, I should be able to retire as a journalist. Now, that might not mean that, because editors' jobs don't often end well. They're a little bit like, I would say, football managers or politicians. It's usually someone else taps you on the shoulder and says, I think it's time for a change. But even if that were to happen, I reckon there'd still be a job for me somewhere in regional or indeed national newspapers, which is, like I say, I'm still crossing my fingers, but that is certainly not what I thought only a few years ago. But anyway, you wanted to grill me about pop-up ads, and I really want to talk about it.
Not. Yes, I think there's two sort of distinct arguments, not against, but just controversial conversations that always happen around the EDP and the EDP Evening News. But it is, I think, first of all, it's you mentioned the quality of the editorial or the text and the story. But it seems to me, and I've cited a few examples to you before, but it's always, you say there's no bias, but it's always biased towards, against the person or the reader. You're assuming the reader is perhaps less clever. Shall I put it like that? If I give an example, that will be better. But for example, I've seen the headline with landlord evicts business from premises. Made out that the landlord's a crook. Then you read further along, and it's like the tenant hasn't paid his rent for 8 months or whatever, and it's clear that wasn't strictly correct, the headline. I've seen other stories. Again, another landlord actually, the mold found in property, and it actually wasn't that property; it was the neighbouring property, and just
on that one, I'd go back and read the follow-ups. Because it's interesting.
I have read them, and that's it's written. I'm sure you agree. It's written to draw your eyes in. It's written to draw what you think the readers will want to hear.
Yeah. So when I say that there's no bias, I'm very much talking about politics there. We would never say vote Labour, vote Tories, vote the Pen. We would never do that. But national newspapers do. You do have to write in a certain way when you're at the Daily Mail because the paper leans right. But we do have bias for Norfolk. We do shout and scream about Norfolk, and we want it to be better. We do have a bias for our readers and to try and help them make their lives better. And we do have a bias when it comes to what we see as hypocrisy or injustice. Now, the two, I can't remember the first example of the story. Sadly, I wish I could. I can't read absolutely every story. I'm not going to go into the second one because it's probably not an appropriate platform and it's still ongoing. But I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you said you're trying to draw people in. And because of that,
that's part of the job, isn't it? You've got to try and do that.
Because we need the eyeballs and we need them to read for as long as possible. I always say to people, please read the whole story. Please do. Because you might not get the full understanding until you've got the quotes from the landlord.
I think my fear is, because I do read the whole story, it's just like, well, what about all those people who just caught the headline? I guess that's my...
And I get that. I think it's a very valid point. But I think as journalists, we can't... There are very few stories you can tell in a headline in full.
Yeah.
So some people will... I hate this term because pretty much everyone gets it wrong, but some people would refer to that as clickbait. That's not clickbait. That is what we would refer to as a good headline because it made you click on it.
Yeah.
Clickbait is when you click on it and you get something you weren't expecting. So good examples are, you will have seen them, below actual news, there are sometimes links and and everyone has them, we do too, and companies pay a lot of money for that space on news websites. And it'll say something like, "You won't believe what this Friends star looks like now."
Well, I was going to come on to that.
But when you click on it, you think, "Oh, they're looking all right." Actually, you were expecting some horror show. Insert Cheers or Frasier. It's not just Friends. That's different. That's very, very different. Most of the regional and national news that you'll see online doesn't use clickbait. And it's become this shorthand for the fact that people get annoyed with news websites. But, I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s, people would get annoyed by headlines in printed newspapers. There was always controversy about what Kelvin Mackenzie, the infamous and famous editor of The Sun was doing. There was always controversy around Piers Morgan, Andy Coulson, Rebecca Brooks. Editors are figures of controversy because they've got a massive amount of power and they've got readers to look after, and they've got they've got commercial. Got to have commercial awareness as well. They've got politicians who always want a favour, but are always trying to keep something secret. All that happens here in Norwich, in Norfolk, on a slightly smaller scale. Yeah. Hence why I often refer to myself as the most hated man in Norfolk. My emails, of which I get about 800 a day, are by and large people telling me how dreadful I am or our newspaper is, and that's simply not the case. We've just ruffled their feathers, and like I say, we don't always get it right. Most of the people whose feathers we ruffle are not people who've been accidentally caught up in something. They've had it coming. They've either been in court or they're, and it's kind of par for the course if that's some of the decisions you make. Then there's the politicians. I have very little sympathy for the politicians. They work really hard. Don't get me wrong. But they knew what they were getting themselves in for, just like I knew what I was getting.
It's no different to celebrities.
Yeah, and again, I have very little sympathy for celebrities, as long as we're not crossing the line. There is still a line, and I think by and large the industry is far better behaved than it was when I was a young reporter now, because of things that have happened and things that newspapers have done wrong, and hopefully lessons that we've learned. Regionals were never like that anyway, really. We do the odd dubious thing, but it was generally for the right reasons rather than just a quick celeb headline. But with regard to that free audience and those pop-up adverts, which I know annoy people because they tell me, that's because it's free. You'll remember free newspapers.
Just to sort of break that down into almost right. We're talking about the adverts now. So I mean, it's more. Is there not a better way? Could you not put local companies there in their place? I would pay good money to be there.
We'll talk about that afterwards.
But it's more. I think poorly. I feel sorry for almost the people who, like perhaps the older generation, who would see that and think, oh, that was EDP told me that. And they make you skip through about 20 different pages to get to the reason you clicked on it in the first place. Isn't it? Because that's so poor. I know it's out of your control. It's a totally different website or whatever, but it's still the perception that you put it in front of them. And is that not damaging?
I think there's a fine line to tread for us, and because as an industry we do need the cash. I like, the fact that we still employ a heck of a lot of journalists at Prospect House. And I like that we are always in the market to get new young talent from UEA. I like that, I like it. We've had a brilliant young journalist who's leaving us soon, going off to work for the Press Association, in fact, and we've had others. That's great. They're on their journey, but we need revenue sources, we're still at the point where we're on the corner to turn it, but we're still a long way to go. So, is it damaging? People have certainly said that to me in the past, but it's also revenue. So, as I say, the way to make the user experience better is to pay for that product. And that if you pay for the lower digital subscription, they are fixed ads, and if you've got the app as well, there are no ads. Now, the price points differ, but they're not by much. The full price is $7.99 a month for the EDP. And like I say, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people who really love it, and lots of people who've said, I wasn't keen on this. I know I love it. I can't do without it. That solves the problem. Now, we don't get all our stuff. If you are a reader that maybe only comes to the EDP once or twice, you've probably never had the little message that pops up with me going, you've had your share of free stories this month. You're going to have to pay, or we'll see you next month. But for the industry, and therefore the important job that journalists do to survive, we quite rightly should be selling our product. And that will solve the problem.
No argument
that will
about
solve that
Yeah,
problem.
yeah.
You know, people say to me, there are people who are happy to take the free products, aren't bothered about the pop-ups, aren't bothered about some of the other advertising issues that you've mentioned. And they moan at me and say, why do I have to pay for news? And I say, well, would you go into Tesco, pop the EDP under your arm and just walk out? They go, no, of course not. So it's just the same. It's exactly the same. It's the same content. And, you know, obviously a digital subscription to EDP is a lot cheaper than buying the newspaper every day. Newspapers will become luxury products because they're expensive to print. They're expensive to get here. It's, you know, there's a carbon footprint issue that, you know, there's a business we have to consider as well, and quite rightly, and it's dirty and mucky, and you know, I love them, I absolutely adore them, but the reader more and more wants it online.
Yeah.
So we have to change, and we've got two, and I've spoken about this at length, and I've listened to many people speak about it, you know, far better than I will now. But we've got these two demographics, because people don't tend to start consuming local news unless it's massive, you know, Cathedral burns down, Norwich City get relegated, whatever. They don't tend to come to regional papers until they hit their sort of mid-30s and they start thinking about mortgages, where the kids are going to go to school, is this a nice area, when are the bins going to get collected, who should I vote for now I'm interested in this area because my child's in the world. And and I'm kind of cool with that. You know, that's what we do well. So focus there. So we have young people who have never paid for things online. And these young people now are getting older and are starting to maybe come to regional newspapers and go, why do I have to pay for it? So we have to educate them to pay for it. Then we've got this older audience who is happy to, oh, by the way, that young audience is happy to pay for stuff online. So that's a plus, that's good news. But they've never paid for news. So they're, and of course the BBC, an issue. Then you've got an older audience who's delighted to pay for news, can see the value in it, has got much bigger life experience and knows how important journalism is, but they don't want to pay for anything online. So they've got to still be getting the physical paper. So we need to try and help them change. We need to try and help them change in two different ways. Amidst all this and towering over it and casting a shadow upon it is the BBC, who the majority of people think
it's free.
I can get it for free. When of course it's not.
Of course
it's not. No. And here is, and I've been doing some work with the Department of Culture, Media and Science on the BBC, and I always put this little caveat in. I love the BBC. I listen to the Today programme every morning. I think I love paying my licence fee. I've been listening to TMS this summer while the cricket's been on. I think they do broadcast, radio and television superbly well, and I take their news content as well. But what they've started doing in the regions, and some of the listeners may have noticed this in Norfolk, is taking resource, really good, skilled, highly paid, I imagine, resource out of local broadcasting, TV and radio, and putting it into local digital. And it feels to me, said this to the Culture Secretary, did a speech at Westminster last year where I said exactly this, seems to me like the BBC have parked their tanks on our lawn. And that is not in their remit. It very much is not in their remit. They shouldn't be taking potential readers from me for their websites just for clicks. And here's how I like to look at it. Because people go,
and they're doing that nationally, are they?
Yeah. Say, oh no, that's not the case. That's not the case. BBC do a good job now. And it's free. Well, it's not free. You're legally obliged to pay your licence fee. So imagine this. I open a coffee shop. It's going well. People quite like the coffee. Every now and then they might moan about something. That's the pop-up analogy. But I'll sort it for them. Or they'll pay more and get a back of a coffee. And business is booming, you know. Then someone next door opens another coffee shop. What are you going to do? It's a free market. Carry on doing your coffee. You know, a bit of competition. Fine. Then you learn that everyone in the town is legally obliged annually to pay a subscription to that coffee shop. And why are they going to come and buy my coffee on top of that? we can live happily side by side, the BBC and the regional media, and there is a brilliant scheme called the Local Democracy Reporter Scheme, where the BBC give us money, and we ensure that we have resource in council meetings, and we manage them. We print their stuff, but we share it out as well. It's a little bit like a newswire, how it was about before. But we manage them. They're in our newsrooms. That happens in all the big papers. Brilliant idea, great scheme. Very supportive of that. It's very forward thinking of the BBC. But there's been a retrograde step recently in moving that resource, and my concern is that just as we're starting to get round that corner, the BBC come in and start doing stuff which they have no business to do, frankly. I don't think, I haven't seen anything regionally so far digitally that's really, really worried me. So maybe I'm being worried unduly. I don't think, and this is by no means wouldn't want to, throw any shade or anything on the BBC's local digital reports, but I think we're offering a heck of a lot more, and we're offering it a lot deeper and a lot quicker. So I do think the go-to source for news is still the EDP, Norwich Evening News, in Norwich and Norfolk, but I'm concerned that their newsrooms are going to grow and grow and grow, and it's going to impact our business. So that is a big issue facing the industry at the moment, alongside trying to get those people to pay either in print. We're delighted if you want to buy in print, but digitally is definitely the future. So that's kind of where we are, I guess.
Yeah. So you mentioned about advertising specifically. I mean, because I'm not a subscriber, I don't know. When you say there's fixed ad option, are they perhaps local companies or people willing to advertise?
They very much often are. I think there is a journey that I'll come out, and I'm not the best person to talk about this, but I'm the only one here. So the commercial team has also been on a digital transformation journey. And there's still a great appetite for businesses to advertise in the printed paper. Often they're legacy agreements, but also it's a very different proposition, an advert on a screen, on a smaller screen, than it is in a newspaper, I think. So, we don't just offer adverts, we offer digital marketing solutions. We do all kinds of different things based around the fact that we've got a huge audience, and we also know how to go and get an audience. We've got experts in SEO, for example, and it's going to be an increasingly interesting part of the industry with AI overview and things like that. So, it's not just about fixed place adverts, either whether they're adverts in print or online. There's a lot of other stuff going on. We would love more local advertisers to advertise with us
I was just
online.
thinking, if you, maybe run a story on, I'm trying to think of a good example, but connectivity in Norfolk, broadband connectivity, if you run an article like that, I'd pay good money to be on that as a fixed advert.
There are rules around that. It's not quite as simple as that. The Advertising Standards Agency would perhaps look a little bit dubious on. I mean, you can pay for editorial and control the whole thing, but we have a commercial content team that sit in my team who write some wonderful copy. It's really, really good for very, very complex business and consumer stuff. So, for example, we've done lots of work on renewables. And when we do lots of news stories on renewables, but in those stories it will have to have the balance of the person who doesn't want it. It won't be able to go into that depth. So the commercial content team write it very much in depth. They check it with the client. It's all read before published and all that kind of thing, which is a good option. That is a good vertical for us. But the problem with sometimes with digital, and we used to get it in print as well, the problem with where ads go and what editorial sits next to it, the biggest audience that we have by a mile by subject topic is court and crime. People and have always since Penny Dreadfuls. They've loved reading this. They might not admit to it, but they do. I have the data to back it up. But would you necessarily want to advertise something next to a grisly murder? So if we start letting people pick their advertising spots, then
That's one of the solicitor firms next door to us here. They
might do. Some people would love to, of course. So we never have and won't sell advertising in that manner, just because of that friction between the commercial side of the business and the editorial side of the business has got to be a church and state arrangement, because there is lots of times, I can think of a few only recently, and I'm very good friends with our brilliant commercial director, Laura Blinsky, where I've had to wander over to her desk and say, just so you know, we're writing a story on so-and-so tomorrow, and I don't think they're going to like it. And that company or organisation may well spend tens, even hundreds of thousands of pounds with us. And never once in nearly getting on for 24 years now in the business, never once as an editor or now as I move up the ladder a bit further, an MD or anyone said to me, don't write that story. And we have seen money walk out of the door because of the editorial standards. It usually comes back, but that's how the business runs. It's a strange business, newspapers like that, because we will actively write stories that will upset people. Rightly, we're not looking to upset them. Rightly, and they often think by saying, "Well, we'll stop all advertising." We'll go, all right, sorry then. But that won't happen. So,
in terms of what we can do for you and the entity, what are you looking for from maybe local businesses? What can they do with you? What can we?
Well, I always say to local businesses, and I know, I reasonably well connected because I always speak at the business awards. I was the business editor. I always have got on really well with the business community. Because I think we want similar things. We want Norfolk to thrive. And I've always said that Norfolk doesn't shout loud enough. It doesn't do enough to say, hey, look how brilliant we are. And people come here. It's a little bit out. It's difficult to get to. Norwich, for example, it's a bit difficult to get to. It's been out of the way. And when you get here, people are shot, it's great, isn't it? It's great. When I first came to Norwich, I was just blown away. It's such an incredible city, and Norfolk is such an incredible region. But I think there's this view, not in the business community, I would add, but there is this wider view of, let's just build a wall around it and hope no one comes. Let's just keep it nice as it is.
There definitely is.
I understand that. I understand that. But it is not a feasible way for us to grow into the future. I remember very early as business editor, it was around the time that Britvic were packing up. And they wouldn't tell us exactly why, understandably. But we got some minutes from a board meeting leaked to us. And there was nothing that controversial in there. Britvic weren't doing anything wrong by any means. In fact, they were making a very sensible decision. But they said that it's just really hard to get to the A1 and the M1. It's just really hard, the A47. We need to be shouting louder and louder and louder about those big infrastructure. I think it's getting a little bit better, but we need to carry on shouting because, I always say this, a dear friend of mine said, isn't it great we've got Norfolk Day? It was after the first one. And I think it was 2017, something like that. And I said, yeah, but what have you been doing? The first Yorkshire Day was in 1971. What have you been doing? And Yorkshire as a region is a good example. Yorkshire's lovely and I love it and my heart is there, of course, but I don't live there. There's a reason for that, and that's because Norfolk's better. But if you ask pretty much anyone anywhere, Yorkshire's great, Yorkshire's brilliant. It's completely reimagined itself since the mid-80s and the miners' strikes and all those terrible scenes all the time, day after day, and the poverty and whatnot. To be this kind of cool sort of...
Yeah, no, it has definitely reinvented.
And that is through the Northern Powerhouse and through businesses coalescing and politicians shouting loudly. I don't think we've been served particularly well as a region. I'm not saying our politicians have done anything wrong necessarily. I think we've had some good ones. I think we've had some mediocre ones. I think we've had the odd bad one. That odd bad one ended up being Prime Minister. But we need something to coalesce around, and I'd really like that to be the EDP and the Business Pink. So I think that it's important that we tell your stories. We do have to hold the sector to account sometimes, But by and large, we'll be giving you an opportunity to show off your expertise. We really like thought leadership in the pages of the Business Pink. It's really important. But also we want to lobby on behalf of the business community and more widely Norfolk. The EDP should be seen as a lobbying tool. So if anyone's got any ideas for stories, or indeed has got any stories, and press releases are fine, send them in. We can never guarantee that it will definitely go in, but we'll try our very best. But maybe just have a think about something that's a little bit quirky, not just you've won an award.
Yeah.
So, where is your area of expertise? And then speak to Adam, who I mentioned earlier. You easily find his email address available widely on the EDP website. And send him a note, and chase him up. He's very busy, but he should get back to you and say, I'm an expert in. Maybe we could do a story about that. And it might be that there's some other experts in there quoted as well, But that's a really good way to get businesses noticed, to really promote the sort of things that businesses do in here in the East of England. And for us, it's brilliant as well, because if there's one thing that journalists need, perhaps more than anything else, when they sit down to write a story, it's experts. Because we know a little about a lot, but we need someone who knows absolutely everything about a topic. Yeah. And sometimes, I was talking to someone at the council recently and said, well, how do we get in that sort of thing? I said, well, your HR department must be huge. Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So it could be something about the cost of fuel. It could be something about HR. It could be something about office romances, like we mentioned before. I mean, that would tend to be HR and we'd tend to find it. But think about, as well as thinking about your area of business, think about what stuff that you really are an expert in, and you would be confident to speak to a journalist and them and their reader would learn something. Yeah. And then you've got this handshake and the reader loves it because they go down the pub and they've learned something. And that's important too, because we're adding value into their life. The other thing that, of course, we really need is for you to talk to our commercial team and see if there's some solutions, and think beyond just a quarter-page ad in the paper. That might be perfect for you, but get in touch with them, have a chat. Ask how do I get in front of the biggest audience if that's what you want, or ask how do I get in front of an audience that's really interested in X or Y, or how do I promote this service or that, and there will usually be a way, and we don't just do news. We have videographers who will do you company videos. We have, to a really high standard. These guys are really, really good. They're up and down the country. They were in Scotland recently with goodness knows what drones and all sorts. We have a team of designers who will design you the best ad ever or the best anything ever, whatever you are trying to achieve. I think that there is a perception that we are still just the good old EDP, prints a good paper, we like the pink, and we might buy the goodie bag if we go Carrow Road, and we are so much more than that. The company behind that is called Local IQ. Again, all Newsquest owned, that power all those solutions, whether it's marketing, whether it's just simple advertising request.
Or clickbait.
Sorry?
Or the clickbait.
I mean, yours, not mine. I wouldn't want to upset a client. But I see what you're saying. That would be sold nationally, actually, not through our local team. So the other thing to mention is that that it's called Taboola, that stuff at the bottom. That's sold nationally, and you'll see the same thing on the Daily Mail. See the same thing on the Sun, and also a lot of those that can be quite intrusive adverts that you'll get on the free version of the website are also sold nationally. So they'll often be for, I don't know, I don't need to say a big firm, but a big firm nationally. The regional advertising solutions are much more, they're unlikely to upset anyone, let's put it that way. Yeah. And that's on purpose. We know that that's the best way to do it. And we would love nothing more than to sell more adverts to local firms who are become trusted partners. And we've got loads and loads, of course. We've got a huge client base. And you only need to come along to the business awards or some of the other events that we put on. Events are another big part of our business, to see what a big part the EDP plays in the business community and has done forever. Has done for, it's 174 years old now, the EDP, and it's not going anywhere. It's a big, big deal. But we just need to get out of that mindset of, well, I need to do some marketing. Should I do it on page 5 of the EDP? Well, maybe the answer is yes. Often it is. Often that is the best solution. Or should I buy some Google advertising? Well, we can advise you through all that and show you why you should perhaps make a solution somewhere in the middle, because we can help with social media, your social media audience as well. We can help with your website. We can, there is a solution somewhere there. And in the last 3 years, we've really turned the business round commercially, because more and more businesses here in the east of England are realizing that the solutions that we've given them are working for them. And even when we've had, and I've been reasonably bullish in sort of half one of the year and going into quarter 3 now, increasingly so actually, that the green shoots are coming. Yes, it's been a tougher year than last year, I think, for everyone. I think that's fine. But we do such a better job now at saying to our clients and customers, because often marketing spend is the first that goes, well, actually, if you stick with us and we do this, that's what's going to get us through this difficult patch. And it has. We're getting great client feedback, people saying to the commercial team, thank goodness, because that has really helped us through. So, and these are new services. So if you haven't worked in the last 3 or 4 years with us at the EDP, or associated titles, but you have done in the past, then it's definitely worth having a chat with some of the guys, because things have changed. There are different solutions now, and we have a much bigger network. So if you're trying to get out beyond Norfolk, we will be able to. And you have the
digital option now as well.
Absolutely.
Which could be where your target audience is and wasn't before.
So, yeah, quite.
Right, I think we've touched on almost everything. I can't think of anything we've missed or should be shouting about, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, Richard, and thank you for your time, and I hope we can convert some old farts like me to...
Well, listen, buy the paper, it's absolutely fine, buy the paper. The thing is, I want people's experience of the EDP to be really good. As a journalist, and even the commercial guys, they sit and look through the paper and say, oh no, this page doesn't look, because they want their clients' experience to be good as well. So we want to be able to give you the best UX possible, and the best way for us to do that is for people to support local media. And you might not always agree with us. That's fine. Email me, tell me.
I think it's great, really, and we should be thankful that we've still got this great local authority, because so many other areas and regions haven't. It's important to make the most of what we got. And as I said, thank you for
having me.
Coming in and telling us all about it. But thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Cheers.
The Norfolk Business Show with Danny Snelling, sponsored by MT Comms.
Just a quick word from me. Absolutely thrilled with the response and feedback we've had so far. It really has been so positive. We're going to continue with it. I do just need to ask you all, please, just to take that 1 second to click the subscribe, like, follow button, share them. Just do something for me, because we're never going to be monetized. We're not going to make money from this show, and that's not our intention. We're a local Norfolk show, so we're never going to get those worldwide viewing figures that need to monetize channels. It's not about that. We genuinely are just trying to give back to the business community in Norfolk. So please do that favour for me. It will just increase the visibility of those guests we have on the show, so they get more impact from it. And who knows, if you're a future guest, then you'll get the benefit of that as well. So please do that for me. Obviously, we're sponsoring it from MT Comms. Please do keep us in mind if we can help with anything IT related, Office 365 support, cybersecurity, 365, that sort of thing. We also do telecoms, mobile, CCTV. There's loads of stuff we do. Just reach out to us and ask us if you can help with anything. Thank you, guys.